Sarah Martinez clutched her 7-month-old twins closer to her chest as the rain pounded against the broken windows of the abandoned warehouse. Emma and Jacob were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their mother had nowhere else to go. The cardboard boxes she had arranged as makeshift beds were already soaked through, and Sarah's thin jacket offered little protection against the October chill. 3 weeks had passed since her husband Marcus had thrown them out. The bruises on her arms had faded, but the memory of his rage still haunted her. "Get out and don't come back," he had screamed, his breath reeking of alcohol. "I never wanted those brats anyway." Sarah had grabbed whatever she could carry and fled with her babies, but her sister refused to help, claiming she couldn't afford to house 3 more people. The homeless shelter had a 3-month waiting list. Her bank account held exactly $47, barely enough for formula and diapers for another week. Sarah had tried calling her parents in Colorado, but they hadn't spoken since she married Marcus against their wishes 5 years ago. Pride had kept her from reaching out before, but now desperation was setting in. As thunder crashed overhead, Sarah noticed a tall figure approaching through the rain. She instinctively pulled her babies closer, ready to run despite having nowhere to go. The man wore an expensive black coat and moved with an odd grace that seemed unaffected by the storm. When lightning illuminated his face, Sarah saw pale skin, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying an unusual accent she couldn't place. "Are you all right?" Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to be cautious of strangers, especially in her vulnerable state. But something about his manner seemed genuinely concerned rather than threatening. "We're fine," she lied, though her chattering teeth betrayed her. The man stepped closer, and Sarah could see he was probably in his 30s, with dark hair and an aristocratic bearing. Despite the rain, he seemed completely dry. "My name is Adrian Blackwood. I own several properties in this area, and I happened to notice someone was taking shelter here." He glanced at the babies in her arms. "This is no place for children, especially in weather like this." "We don't have anywhere else to go," Sarah admitted, her voice breaking. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I lost my apartment, and the shelters are full. I just need somewhere safe for my babies until I can figure things out." Adrian studied her face in the dim light, his expression unreadable. "I have a large house not far from here. It has many empty rooms, proper heating, and all the amenities you would need. You and your children are welcome to stay there while you get back on your feet." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned to be wary of men offering help that seemed too good to be true. "I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't possibly accept. I don't even know you, and I have nothing to offer in return." "You don't need to offer anything," Adrian replied simply. "I have more space than I know what to do with, and it would ease my conscience to know you're somewhere safe and warm." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I travel frequently for business, so you would have plenty of privacy. There's a full kitchen, laundry facilities, and rooms that could serve as a nursery." The baby Jacob stirred in Sarah's arms and began to cry, his tiny voice echoing off the warehouse walls. She tried to soothe him, but her hands were numb from the cold. Adrian watched with what appeared to be genuine concern as she struggled. "At least let me take you somewhere warm for tonight," he insisted. "You can decide tomorrow whether you want to accept my longer-term offer. But these children need immediate shelter." Sarah looked down at her twins, both of whom were starting to fuss from the cold and damp. She had been trying so hard to protect them, but she was failing. They deserved better than a leaky warehouse and a mother who couldn't provide basic necessities. Her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Just for tonight," she said finally. "But I need to know more about you, and if anything seems wrong, I'm leaving immediately." Adrian nodded solemnly. "Of course. I completely understand your caution. I should mention that I keep unusual hours due to my work schedule. I'm typically awake at night and sleep during the day. You likely won't see much of me, which might actually be preferable given your situation." He led them to a sleek black car parked nearby. Sarah had never seen anything like it. It looked expensive and foreign, with tinted windows and chrome details that gleamed even in the rain. Adrian held an umbrella over them as they walked, though Sarah noticed he still didn't seem to be getting wet. The car's interior was luxurious beyond anything Sarah had experienced. Soft leather seats, climate control, and enough space for her to comfortably hold both babies. As they drove through the city's wealthier districts, Sarah began to feel nervous again. What kind of man could afford such extravagance and was willing to share it with complete strangers? "What kind of work do you do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Import and export," Adrian replied vaguely. "I deal primarily with European markets, which explains the odd hours. Most of my business contacts are several time zones away." They pulled up to a wrought iron gate that opened automatically as they approached. Beyond it stood a mansion that looked like something from a gothic novel, 3 stories of dark stone with tall windows and ivy creeping up the walls. Despite its imposing appearance, warm light glowed from several windows, making it appear welcoming rather than ominous. "This is your house?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "One of them," Adrian said simply. "I inherited it from my family. As I mentioned, it's far too large for one person." He carried her few belongings while Sarah kept hold of the babies. The front door opened into a grand foyer with marble floors and a sweeping staircase. Antique furniture and old paintings lined the walls, giving the space an air of old money and tradition. "The kitchen is through here," Adrian said, leading them down a hallway. "Please feel free to use anything you need. There are guest rooms upstairs. I've prepared one with a crib and changing table." "I hope that's acceptable." Sarah stared at him in amazement. "You already had baby furniture?" "I made a few phone calls while you were gathering your things," he explained. "I have contacts who could arrange for the essentials to be delivered quickly." The kitchen was larger than Sarah's entire previous apartment, with modern appliances and a pantry stocked with food. Adrian showed her where to find formula, baby food, and other necessities. Everything she could possibly need was already there. "I don't understand," Sarah said, settling into a chair while the babies explored their new surroundings from her lap. "Why are you doing all this for strangers?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window into the rain. "I know what it's like to have nowhere to go," he said finally. "To feel like the world has turned its back on you. No one should have to face that alone, especially not with children to protect." There was something in his voice, a sadness that spoke of personal experience. Sarah found herself wondering about his story, but she was too exhausted to ask more questions. The warmth of the house was already making her drowsy, and the babies were calm for the first time in days. "The guest room is at the top of the stairs, second door on the right," Adrian said. "There are fresh clothes in the closet. I estimated your size and had them delivered as well. Take whatever you need. I'll be in my study if you require anything, though I suspect you'll want a rest." Sarah stood up slowly, still holding her children. "Adrian, I don't know how to thank you. This is incredibly generous." "No thanks necessary," he replied. "Just focus on getting some rest and figuring out your next steps. There's no rush, stay as long as you need." As Sarah climbed the staircase, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Adrian Blackwood than met the eye. His mannerisms were old-fashioned in a way that seemed practiced rather than affected. He moved too quietly for someone his size, and she had yet to see him eat or drink anything. But, whatever his secrets might be, he had offered kindness when she needed it most. The guest room was beautiful, a 4-poster bed with soft linens, an antique wardrobe, and, indeed, a modern crib that looked like it had been professionally assembled. The attached bathroom had fluffy towels and expensive toiletries. Sarah had gone from sleeping on cardboard to luxury accommodations in the span of a few hours. She fed and changed the babies, then settled them in the crib together. They fell asleep almost immediately, finally, safe and warm. Sarah allowed herself a hot shower, the first she had in over a week. When she emerged, she found a tray of food waiting on the dresser, soup, bread, and tea that were still steaming hot though she hadn't heard anyone enter. As she ate, Sarah tried to process everything that had happened. Part of her wondered if she was making a terrible mistake by trusting a stranger. But, looking at her peacefully sleeping children, she knew she had made the only choice she could. Whatever Adrian's motivations might be, he had given them safety when no one else would. She climbed into the soft bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt her body truly relax. Tomorrow she would have to face the reality of her situation and figure out how to rebuild her life. But tonight, she could sleep knowing her babies were safe. Down in his study, Adrian sat in a leather chair, staring into a glass of deep red wine that he hadn't touched. He could hear the steady breathing of his 3 guests upstairs, could sense their heartbeats settling into the rhythm of peaceful sleep. It had been decades since he had shared his home with humans, longer still since he had felt the satisfaction that came from protecting someone truly vulnerable. The scent of their blood called to him, as it always did, but Adrian had learned long ago to resist such urges. He had fed earlier that evening from a willing donor in the city, someone who visited him regularly in exchange for financial compensation and the pleasure his bite could provide. His hunger was sated, and his conscience was clear. He thought about the young woman upstairs, Sarah, and the courage it must have taken to accept help from a stranger. She had every reason to be cautious, yet desperation had forced her to take a leap of faith. Adrian understood that desperation intimately. He remembered his own transformation centuries ago, the terror of finding himself changed into something unnatural, abandoned by those he had once called family. The twins were beautiful, innocent in a way that reminded him why he had chosen to use his supernatural abilities to help rather than harm. In his long existence, Adrian had seen enough cruelty and suffering. If his wealth and resources could ease someone else's burden, then, perhaps his cursed existence had some purpose after all. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, gazing out at his estate grounds. The rain was beginning to subside, but the storm had served its purpose in bringing Sarah and her children to his door. Adrian believed in fate, in the idea that some encounters were meant to happen. He would help this small family find their footing again, and, perhaps in doing so, he would find some measure of peace himself. As the clock struck midnight, Adrian began his nightly routine of checking the security systems and walking the perimeter of his property. The house felt different now with living occupants, warmer somehow, despite the October chill. He found himself looking forward to morning, wondering what conversations might unfold as Sarah began to trust him more. For the first time in many years, Adrian Blackwood had house guests who needed protection rather than feared him. It was a responsibility he welcomed, and a chance to prove that monsters could choose to be guardians instead. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through elegant curtains and the sound of her babies babbling happily in their crib. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see the cracked ceiling of the warehouse. Instead, she found herself in a beautiful bedroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. The events of the previous night came flooding back, the storm, the mysterious Adrian Blackwood, and his incredible offer of shelter. Sarah checked the ornate clock on the nightstand and was surprised to see it was nearly noon. She couldn't remember the last time she had slept so deeply. After feeding and changing the twins, Sarah dressed in clothes from the wardrobe Adrian had somehow provided. Everything fit perfectly, from jeans and sweaters to undergarments and shoes. The quality was better than anything she had owned even before her marriage fell apart. Carrying Emma and Jacob, Sarah made her way downstairs to explore the house in daylight. The mansion was even more impressive than she had realized: high ceilings with crown molding, hardwood floors that gleamed with polish, and artwork that looked genuinely antique. Despite its grandeur, the house had a lived-in quality that made it feel like a home rather than a museum. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and baked goods. On the counter, Sarah found a note written in elegant handwriting: "Good morning, Sarah. Please help yourself to anything you need. I've left contact information for a pediatrician in town if you'd like to have the twins checked over. I'll be unavailable until this evening, but we'll find you when I return. A.B." Beside the note was a stack of cash, more money than Sarah had seen in months. Another note explained: "For any immediate needs you might have: good clothes, formula, transportation. Consider it a loan if it makes you more comfortable accepting it." Sarah stared at the money, her emotions warring between gratitude and suspicion. No one was this generous without wanting something in return. Yet Adrian had asked for nothing, hadn't even stayed around to collect her thanks. She pocketed enough cash for essentials and left the rest untouched. The refrigerator was fully stocked with fresh food, including organic baby food and formula. Sarah prepared bottles for the twins and made herself breakfast, marveling at the luxury of having a full kitchen at her disposal. As she ate, she noticed that despite the fresh coffee smell, There were no dirty dishes or signs that Adrian had eaten anything. After settling the babies in the living room with toys that had apparently been delivered overnight, Sarah called the pediatrician Adrian had recommended. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was able to see them that afternoon and seemed genuinely caring when Sarah explained their recent housing situation. "Mr. Blackwood called ahead," Dr. Walsh mentioned during the examination. "He's arranged for all medical expenses to be covered. He must be a very good friend to be so generous." Sarah didn't correct the assumption, though she wondered how Adrian had managed to arrange so much so quickly. Both twins were healthy despite their recent ordeal, and Dr. Walsh provided Sarah with vitamins and advice about maintaining their care during stressful times. On the way back to the mansion, Sarah stopped at a coffee shop and overheard two women discussing Adrian Blackwood. "He owns half the historic district," one said. "Old family money, but he keeps to himself. Some people think he's odd because you never see him during the day." "My sister works at the bank," the other woman replied. "She says he's incredibly wealthy but very private. Donates huge amounts to local charities anonymously. There are rumors he's some kind of European aristocrat." Sarah listened intently but learned little concrete information. Adrian remained an enigma, wealthy, generous, and mysteriously nocturnal. When she returned to the house, she spent the afternoon exploring more of the rooms. Most were beautifully furnished but felt unused, as if Adrian lived in only a small portion of the mansion. The library was particularly impressive, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages. Many appeared to be first editions or historical texts. Sarah noticed several books about European history, particularly focusing on Romania and the surrounding regions. There were also medical texts, philosophy books, and, surprisingly, several modern parenting guides that looked recently purchased. As evening approached, Sarah felt nervous about seeing Adrian again. The daylight had given her time to think, and the rational part of her mind was screaming that the situation was too good to be true. No one helped strangers this extensively without ulterior motives. She prepared dinner for herself and the twins, constantly glancing at the windows as darkness fell. At exactly 8 o'clock, she heard the front door open. Adrian's voice called out, "Sarah? I'm home. May I join you?" She found him in the foyer, looking exactly as polished and composed as the night before. He wore another expensive suit and carried a briefcase, playing the part of a businessman returning from work. But Sarah noticed he cast no reflection in the ornate mirror behind him. "How was your day?" Adrian asked, his tone genuinely interested. "I hope you found everything you needed." "It was good," Sarah replied carefully, watching his face. "The twins saw a doctor, and we explored a bit." "Adrian, I need to ask you something directly." "Of course. Why are you doing all this? And please don't tell me it's just kindness to strangers. People don't behave this way without reasons." Adrian was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words. "You're right to be suspicious. Most people would want something in return for this kind of help." He gestured for her to sit in the living room, where the twins were playing on a blanket. "I told you yesterday that I know what it's like to have nowhere to go," Adrian continued. "That wasn't entirely honest. I've never been homeless or poor. But I have been abandoned by family, rejected by society, forced to live on the margins of normal life." Sarah studied his expression, noting the sadness that seemed to perpetually lurk in his eyes. "What happened to you?" "A long time ago, I became something that people fear," Adrian said carefully. "I won't burden you with the details, but the result was that I lost everything I thought I knew about myself and my place in the world. I've spent years learning to build a new life, one where I could use my advantages to help others rather than hurt them." "You're being very cryptic," Sarah observed. "I have to be. The truth would probably send you running, and I don't want that to happen until you're in a better position to take care of yourself and your children." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Are you dangerous?" "Not to you," Adrian replied immediately. "Never to you or your children. I swear that on whatever honor I have left." There was something in his tone that convinced Sarah he was telling the truth, at least about not meaning them harm. But his evasiveness only deepened the mystery. "How long have you lived here?" Longer than you might expect, Adrian said. This house has been in my family for generations. I've become something of a caretaker for it. And, you live here alone? Usually, yes. I don't have many guests. Most people find me unsettling after a while. Sarah watched him interact with her children, noting how gentle he was despite his obvious discomfort with their natural human needs. When Jacob dropped his bottle, Adrian retrieved it with inhuman speed, then seemed to realize his mistake and moved more slowly afterward. Adrian, are you sick? Sarah asked suddenly. You're very pale, you don't seem to eat, and I haven't seen you during daylight hours. You could say that, Adrian replied with a bitter smile. I have a condition that requires a very specific lifestyle. It's not contagious, if that's what you're worried about. Over the following days, Sarah settled into an odd routine with her mysterious host. Adrian would disappear before dawn and return after sunset, always impeccably dressed and carrying himself with an otherworldly grace. He provided everything Sarah and the twins needed but maintained a careful distance, as if afraid of becoming too attached. Sarah began to piece together small clues about Adrian's true nature. He never ate food in her presence, though he would sit with her during meals and engage in conversation. He moved with unnatural quiet and speed when he thought she wasn't watching. The house had no mirrors on the ground floor, and she had yet to see him during daylight hours. The most telling incident occurred on their fifth night together. Sarah woke to the sound of one of the twins crying and went to check on them. As she passed Adrian's room, she noticed the door was slightly open. Curiosity overcoming caution, she peered inside. The room was decorated in dark colors with heavy curtains blocking any hint of outside light. But it was what she didn't see that made her breath catch. There was no bed. Instead, an ornate wooden box sat in the center of the room, large enough for a person to lie down in. It looked disturbingly like a coffin. Sarah backed away quietly, her mind racing. Combined with Adrian's nocturnal habits, his pale complexion, and his apparent lack of reflection, a terrifying possibility began to form. But it was too ridiculous to consider seriously. Vampires were fantasy, not reality. The next evening, Sarah decided to test her theory. When Adrian joined her for dinner, she had prepared a meal with garlic bread and wore a small silver cross necklace she had found among her belongings. Adrian showed no reaction to either item, which both relieved and confused her. He complimented the meal and engaged in normal conversation, though Sarah noticed he didn't actually eat any of the bread. When she mentioned feeling a bit dizzy and asked if he had any aspirin, Adrian immediately produced a bottle from a kitchen drawer. You seem to have thought of everything, Sarah commented, studying his face. I try to be prepared, Adrian replied simply. Even for things like children's medications, baby formula, and women's clothing in my exact size? Adrian met her gaze steadily. I made some educated guesses and had help from people who are good at such things. What kind of people? People who are paid well to ask no questions and work quickly. Sarah realized she was pushing too hard and backed off. Whatever Adrian was hiding, he had shown her nothing but kindness. She decided that unless he gave her reason to fear for her safety or that of her children, she would respect his privacy. But, that night, as she lay in bed listening to the sounds of the old house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was living with someone, or something, far more dangerous than he appeared. The rational part of her mind insisted that vampires were impossible, but the evidence was mounting in ways that were becoming harder to ignore. Down the hall, Adrian sat in his study, acutely aware of Sarah's increased suspicion. He could hear her elevated heart rate, could sense her growing wariness. Part of him wanted to tell her the truth and end the deception, but he knew that revealing his vampiric nature would likely send her fleeing into the night with her children. For the first time in decades, Adrian had something that felt like a family under his roof. He was protective of this young woman and her babies in ways that surprised him. The thought of losing them before he could ensure their safety was unbearable. But secrets had a way of revealing themselves, and Adrian knew that Sarah was too intelligent to remain in the dark much longer. Soon, he would have to decide whether to trust her with the truth or find another way to help her that didn't require her continued presence in his home. As midnight approached, Adrian made his decision. Tomorrow evening, he would tell Sarah everything and let her choose whether to stay or go. It was a risk that terrified him more than anything he had faced in his long, unnatural life. The next evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made the mansion feel cozy rather than imposing. Sarah had spent the day playing with her twins in the garden, marveling at how quickly they seemed to be thriving in their new environment. Emma had taken her first real steps between the garden benches, and Jacob was babbling with increasing complexity. When Adrian returned that night, he seemed different, more nervous than she had ever seen him. His usual composed demeanor was replaced with obvious anxiety, and he kept running his hands through his dark hair as if trying to work up courage for something difficult. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "There are things about me that you need to know, especially if you're going to continue staying here." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had been expecting this conversation, but that didn't make it easier. "All right. Let me just put the twins to bed first." "Actually," Adrian said carefully, "what I have to tell you might be easier to believe if they're awake. Children often see things more clearly than adults." That statement sent chills down Sarah's spine, but she nodded and settled into the living room with Emma and Jacob playing on their blanket. Adrian paced for several minutes before finally sitting across from her, his hands clasped tightly. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. I need you to listen to everything before you react, and I need you to know that despite what I am, I would never hurt you or your children." "What you are?" Sarah repeated, though she suspected she already knew. Adrian took a deep breath he didn't actually need. "I'm a vampire, Sarah. I have been for over 300 years. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at him, waiting for the punchline or the explanation that would make this make sense. When none came, she laughed nervously. "That's not possible. Vampires are fairy tales." "Are they?" Adrian asked gently. He stood and walked to the window, where the evening light was fading rapidly. "Have you noticed that you've never seen me during daylight? That I don't eat food, don't appear in mirrors, move more quickly and quietly than humans should?" Sarah's mouth went dry as she realized he was right about all of those things. "People have medical conditions that watch," Adrian said simply. He moved across the room faster than her eyes could track, appearing suddenly beside her chair. When he smiled, Sarah saw elongated canine teeth that definitely hadn't been there moments before. His eyes, which had always seemed unusually light, now glowed with an otherworldly luminescence. Sarah instinctively pulled her children closer, but, to her amazement, neither twin seemed afraid. Jacob actually reached toward Adrian with a delighted gurgle, as if he found the transformation fascinating rather than terrifying. "How is this possible?" Sarah whispered. "I was turned in 1694, Adrian said, his features returning to their human appearance as he sat back down. "I was traveling through Romania when I was attacked by another vampire. I died and came back as something else entirely." "And you've been alive for over 300 years? Undead would be more accurate, but yes. I've learned to adapt to different eras, to blend in with human society. This house has been my sanctuary for the past 50 years. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process this information. "The blood," she said suddenly. "You need to drink blood to survive." Adrian nodded gravely. "I do. But I've never killed to feed, Sarah. There are people in the city who allow me to feed from them in exchange for payment. It's a business arrangement that harms no one. The people who helped you get supplies for us," Sarah realized. "They're vampires too?" "Some are vampires, others are humans who know about our world and work with us. There's an entire hidden community that exists alongside normal human society." Sarah stood up and began pacing, much as Adrian had been doing earlier. "This is insane. You're telling me that vampires are real, that you're one of them, and that I've been living in a vampire's house for over a week." "You've been living in my home," Adrian corrected. "I'm still the same person who offered you shelter that night in the warehouse. My nature doesn't change the fact that I wanted to help you." "But why?" Sarah demanded. "Why would a vampire care about a homeless woman and her babies?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression distant. "When I was first turned, I lost everything. My family, my friends, my entire identity. I was alone and terrified, with no one to explain what was happening to me or how to survive. The vampire who made me abandoned me immediately after the transformation.
That must have been terrifying. It was. I spent decades learning to control my hunger, to navigate this new existence without guidance.
I made terrible mistakes, hurt people I didn't mean to hurt. By the time I learned to live with honor again, I had already lost any chance of a normal life.
Sarah sat back down, studying his face.
Despite the impossibility of his revelation, she found herself believing him. Too many pieces fell into place: his wealth accumulated over centuries, his old-fashioned mannerisms, his obvious discomfort with normal human activities. "So when you saw us that night," she said slowly, "you saw people who were lost and alone, like you once were."
"Exactly.
And, unlike my situation, yours could be fixed with resources I had available. I could give you what no one gave me: safety, time to heal, and a chance to rebuild." Emma crawled over to Adrian and pulled herself up using his leg as support. She babbled at him cheerfully, completely unafraid. Adrian looked down at her with such tender expression that Sarah felt her remaining fears begin to dissolve.
"They're not afraid of you," Sarah observed. "Children often aren't. They sense intentions more clearly than adults do."
"Your twins know I mean them no harm." Sarah watched her daughter pat Adrian's knee with tiny hands.
"What happens now? Do you expect us to keep living here, pretending this is normal?"
"I don't expect anything," Adrian said.
"I understand if you want to leave.
I can arrange for a safe place for you to stay, help you find work, provide financial support until you're stable. You don't owe me anything, and knowing the truth shouldn't change that." "But you'd prefer if we stayed," Sarah guessed.
Adrian's expression became vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Yes.
I know it's selfish, but having you here has made this house feel like a home for the first time in decades. You and your children have brought life and warmth to a place that had become little more than a beautiful tomb." Sarah picked up Jacob, who was getting fussy, and walked to the window. The garden stretched out below them, peaceful and welcoming in the moonlight.
"If we stayed, what would that look like? Would we just pretend you're human? We would establish boundaries that make you comfortable. I would continue to give you complete privacy during daylight hours.
My nocturnal lifestyle actually means you'd have the house mostly to yourselves."
"And feeding?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer.
"I would continue to handle that away from the house, as I always have. It would never interfere with your daily life or put you in any danger." Sarah turned back to face him, noting how carefully he was watching her expression.
"Are there others? Other vampires who might object to humans living here?"
"I'm what you might call a vampire king," Adrian admitted.
"I have authority over others of my kind in this territory.
My decisions are respected, and anyone under my protection is safe from harm."
"A king?" Sarah repeated. "How does that work?"
"Vampire society is hierarchical.
Age and power determine rank, and I'm one of the oldest vampires in North America.
It's a responsibility I take seriously, keeping our kind hidden, preventing conflicts with humans, maintaining order." The babies were getting tired, and Sarah realized they needed to be put to bed soon. But she had so many more questions, so many implications to consider.
"Adrian, I don't know what to think about any of this."
"You don't have to decide tonight," he said gently.
"Take whatever time you need to process this information.
I'll answer any questions you have, but I won't pressure you to stay if you're not comfortable." Sarah spent the next hour getting the twins ready for bed, her mind spinning with everything Adrian had revealed. As she tucked them into their crib, she marveled at how normal the routine felt despite learning that their protector was a supernatural being. When she returned downstairs, Adrian was sitting in his study reading a leather-bound book. He looked up when she entered, his expression hopeful but guarded. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from him. "A week ago, I was sleeping in a warehouse with 2 babies, no money, and no prospects. Tonight, I'm in a beautiful home with everything I could need, my children are healthy and happy, and I'm safer than I've been in years."
"But now you know the truth about what I am."
"Yes, and it's terrifying and impossible and completely insane," Sarah admitted. it doesn't change the fact that you saved us. It doesn't change the kindness you've shown or the way you've protected us without asking for anything in return." Adrian set down his book, giving her his full attention.
"What are you saying?"
"I'm saying that I'd like to stay, if you'll have us. Not just until I get back on my feet, but longer. The twins need stability, and I need time to heal from everything that happened with Marcus. This feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has."
Relief flooded Adrian's features. "Are you certain?"
"Once you're part of my world, even peripherally, there's no going back to complete normalcy. Normal has never worked out well for me anyway," Sarah said with a small smile.
"Besides, I think Emma and Jacob would miss you if we left. They've gotten attached."
"And their mother?"
Adrian asked carefully.
Sarah felt herself blush. Over the past week, she had begun to feel something more than gratitude toward Adrian. His gentleness with her children, his respect for her boundaries, and his obvious efforts to make them comfortable had awakened feelings she thought Marcus had killed forever. "Their mother has gotten attached too," she admitted. Adrian stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. "Sarah, you should know that while vampires can form deep emotional bonds, we love differently than humans do.
More intensely, more possessively. If you're suggesting what I think you are, you need to understand that my feelings for you would be overwhelming?"
Sarah suggested. "Eternal," Adrian corrected. "Vampires mate for life, in the truest sense. If I allowed myself to love you completely, it would be forever." Sarah reached out and touched his cheek, marveling at how cool his skin was.
"And if a human allowed herself to love a vampire completely?"
"Then, she would become part of our world permanently. Protected by vampire law, safe from any harm, cherished beyond measure." Sarah leaned down and kissed him gently, tasting the otherworldly coolness of his lips. When they separated, Adrian looked stunned. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered.
"I've never been sure about anything," Sarah replied honestly.
"But I'm tired of being afraid, and I'm tired of being alone.
You offered us shelter when we had nowhere else to go. Maybe I can offer you something in return, a reason to see this beautiful house as a home instead of a tomb." Adrian's eyes glowed briefly with emotion. "You and your children have already given me more than you know."
As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of one of the twins crying drifted down from upstairs. Sarah started to get up, but Adrian was already moving.
"Allow me," he said.
"If I'm going to be part of this family, I should help with all aspects of caring for them." Sarah followed him upstairs and watched from the doorway as Adrian gently picked up Jacob, who stopped crying immediately. The sight of this powerful, ancient being cradling her son with infinite tenderness made Sarah's heart swell with love.
"There you are, little one," Adrian murmured in a voice meant only for the baby.
"No need for tears. We're all here, and we're all safe." Emma stirred in her crib and reached out toward Adrian.
He managed to hold both twins, somehow making it look effortless.
They settled against him contentedly, and Sarah realized they had found something she never expected, a protector who would love them unconditionally and defend them against any threat. "This is your family now," Sarah said softly.
"If you want it to be."
Adrian looked at her with such gratitude and love that it took her breath away. "I've lived for over 3 centuries, and I never dared hope for something like this."
"Well," Sarah said, moving to stand beside them, "you have it now. We all do."
Outside, storm clouds gathered again, but inside the mansion, 3 humans and 1 vampire created their own warmth. Sarah had found her sanctuary, Adrian had found his purpose, and 2 babies had found the safest guardians they could ever hope for. The future would bring challenges. Sarah would need to learn about vampire society, Adrian would need to navigate the complexities of raising human children, and they would all need to adjust to their unconventional family structure. But they would face those challenges together. As Adrian sang a lullaby in a language Sarah didn't recognize, she realized that sometimes the best shelter comes from the most unexpected sources. She had whispered that there was no place for them in the world, but Adrian had proven her wrong. His castle, their home, would shelter them all, for as long as they wanted to stay. And, for the first time in her life, Sarah believed that might be forever.